Hello, welcome back to Between the Hashes, our weekly college football primer, coming to you from Los Angeles, California. I'm your host, Matt Kime, and today we are finally at the end of the season, the national championship game following two very exciting and very close playoff games. But before we get into a deep dive on it, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for all college football news and updates on the Washington Commanders with the John Kime Report. Now let's get into the game. So for the second year in a row, we had two playoff games that were one score each, with the Alabama-Michigan Rose Bowl going into overtime, and Texas making a furious comeback only to fall short at about the 15-yard line at the end of the Sugar Bowl against Washington. Start with the Washington side before we get on to Michigan. Michael Penix threw for 430 yards and threw for multiple touchdown passes in the Sugar Bowl. They were basically having their way with the Texas secondary, and I remember saying in my prediction video for that game that game would come down to Washington's skill players versus Texas's secondary, and Texas's defensive line versus Washington's offensive line. And they didn't give up a single sack. In fact, Washington's offensive line has given up only 11 sacks on the year, which is both a credit to them and to Penix being decisive with the ball. And I imagine Washington is going to seek to try to have a similar game plan and hoping that their offense can overpower the strengths of the opposing defense. And that offensive line, once again, is going to need to step up against a unit that just sacked Alabama's quarterback 6 times, 5 of which happened in the first half. Now, one really big cause for concern for Washington is that running back Dylan Johnson went down with an injury at the very, very, very tail end of the game. Now, while it looks like he will actually be playing in the game, it probably won't be at 100%, and there's not really anybody else on that roster who has been running the ball with the same caliber he has. And it's not like Washington has this amazing running attack, but what they like to do on offense is to run just enough to basically keep you honest. Not unlike Tennessee last year in some ways, but not nearly the same sort of success though. At the same time, like Tennessee from last year with the Hendon Hooker team. Now, one of the weird little quirks of this game is that it's actually both these teams will be in the Big Ten next year, and they actually play in the regular season next year, so that's going to be a game to watch going forward. So basically, Penix turned into Superman in that game, and they will need that kind of performance. Again, can they get a repeat performance that spectacular against the number 1 rated defense in the country is going to be the big question. Now, Washington's big weakness all year has far and away been its defense. They're ranked something like 90th in total defense, and S&P I think has them in the 40s. They're kind of, or the 40s or 50s, something like that. They're all over the place defensively, and they would have the worst rated defense since before the BCS era, which started in 1998. Since before the BCS era started. So they would have had the worst defense to win a national championship in a very long time. Speaking of which, Washington actually hasn't even won a championship themselves since 1990. And on the other side of the field, Michigan hasn't won since 1997. So while we won't see a first-time winner, we'll see a first-time winner this century. So while of these teams, they won't be winning their first national championship, but it will be the first time in a generation for either of these schools. We saw from Kyle McCord and Marvin Harrison and all of them in the Ohio State-Michigan game that you can somewhat move the ball, but even then, Michigan made it tough going. And so Washington's key to the game is to start fast, get out to a lead quick, and just play their game and see if their offensive line can dictate that style of offense. Because if they can do that, they might have a chance. One of the key matchups to watch is going to be Michigan cornerback Will Johnson versus Rome Odunze. Now, Will Johnson is one of the top corners in the country, one of the best players on a loaded defense, and so it's gonna be, can he shut these guys down? Can he cover Odunze and Polk and McMillan at times? Because Washington actually has a lot of comparisons to like what Ohio State was with like CJ Stroud for the 2 years that he was there, and so there's a lot of comparisons saying that, well, Michigan's actually kind of built to beat this style of team, this style of offense, because it's how they had to play to beat Ohio State these last couple of years. Maybe not this year, maybe not notwithstanding. But the comparisons are actually not that off from each other, especially the last 2 years. Ohio State was top 10 and top 5 in offense, averaging well over 7 yards a play, and Washington's well up there too. They lead the nation in passing. They're 10th in total offense, and so it's some of the comparisons are very, very easy to see, with star quarterback led by the best receiving core in the country. And so we've seen this type of matchup from Michigan before in each of the last probably 4 years, or 5 years if you skip 2020. So there's that factor. There's the factor that Michael Penix and Kalen Deboer actually both played against Michigan in the 2020 season while both of them were still at Indiana. Penix had a very, very good game in that one. He won. I don't know how much you should take away from that. That game was, 3.5 years ago. The rosters of both of these teams is pretty significantly different from it was back then. And more importantly for Michigan, some of the defensive philosophies are different back then as well. But my point in bringing that up is that the Michigan coaching staff has seen this combination before. So Michigan won their Rose Bowl by pretty much dominating the line of scrimmage. They ran the ball with a moderate level of success, but where they excelled was defensively. They sacked Jalen Milroe 6 times and more or less shut the Alabama offense down, with the exception of a couple drives in the second half. They survived what could have been one of the most disastrous muff punts I've ever seen, and hung out to win in overtime. Now, part of the thing for Alabama was that their center kept screwing up snap after snap. That led to a number of aborted plays at critical moments, including that 4th down attempt at the end of overtime that cost Alabama the game. But some of it is that their defense was just on fire. J.J. McCarthy's numbers weren't spectacular, but he made the plays when he needed to. He was mobile in situations when he needed to. His decision making was pretty good. And so, like I said, like one of my big criticisms of Michigan, or I guess question might be a better way to phrase it, is that if the pressure is turned up on a player like McCarthy and he has to go out and win you the game, can he do it? And my argument was that we've never really seen him in a situation where he had to do that outside of maybe the TCU game from last year. And like I said, I don't think he was like amazing in the Rose Bowl, but he certainly was a huge factor in them winning, especially some of those drives at the end, including a really, really long drive at the end. And so I think it's safe to say that the moment isn't really too big for this Michigan team. And so Michigan can also, and what Michigan's going to want to do is they're going to basically want to shut down and control the game and kind of just wear the opponent down. It's similar to like a boxer wearing you out for the first 5 or 6 rounds of a match and then going on really on the offensive in the later rounds when you're starting to tire out. Michigan kind of operates in a similar way. And so, like I said, this game is going to be dictated by who can control the pace. Can Washington play their game? Or is Michigan going to try and limit the number of possessions, play a ball control game? Because if we go the limited possessions, if we go the ball control route, Michigan should win this game. The line is currently sitting at -5, by the way. If Washington can win, it'll be because they can score probably at least 30 to 35 points, get their offense going, and then they start winning these matchups against guys like Will Johnson. Now, if the game goes into a shootout route, even then Michigan still, because it may be especially because of how bad Washington's defense has been at times. Maybe I'm saying this because of how bad Washington's defense has been, but teams with defenses like that don't typically win. Sure, they've played when they needed to, but they very nearly blew it against Texas. The thing I think is interesting about both of these teams is that they have both had to face some pretty heavy adversity in some way or others. With Michigan, you have the whole distraction of your coach being suspended for half the regular season for multiple different violations. You have all the noise regarding the scandal. I don't really feel the need to talk about that. There's not really anything new to talk about there on that front. But the team itself has been able to come together and use that as a motivator to see it through, basically. Sometimes teams, when faced with scandal, they either come together or they fall apart. Michigan's done the former. With their Alabama game, that was actually I think that was the first game all year where they were trailing in the 4th were trailing that late in the fourth, and they found a way to come back and win it in overtime. Washington, on the other hand, has had to kind of fight and claw and survive multiple different styles of games. A game where their offense, led by Penix, just disappeared entirely, even at home with the Arizona State game, or shootouts on the road like USC, or games where you think where everybody is calling on the other team to be better than them with the Oregon game. And so both of these teams have had to overcome both mental and on the field, both on and off the field obstacles to get here. One of the other significant things is that we're going to see we're guaranteed to get a non-SEC champion for the first time since Clemson last won, which was in 2018. We are going to see a team win their first national championship since the 90s, regardless of who goes on. You see a career resurgence for Kalen Deboer, who has won at every level of football before he became an FBS coach. You have Jim Harbaugh and his build-up with Michigan, the struggles with Ohio State, him finally pulling it together at Michigan, only to be marred by the scandal, but to fight through it. There's a lot of noise that he may actually leave Michigan to go back to the NFL after this game, which is happening on the day where a lot of NFL coaches will be losing their jobs. So there's a lot of factors in here. You have Michigan's super senior-laden team. J.J. McCarthy might not even leave Michigan, but the point I'm trying to make with Michigan is that this team might look completely different a month from now. For a lot of these guys, you have the let's win and go out on top factor to all of this. This is the last game of a 4-team playoff era. This is the last game before conference realignment completely changes college football as we know it, with the SEC and Big Ten basically swallowing up everything in their paths. Washington will be in the Big Ten next year. This game is the close of an era, and ironically, it's kind of a parallel to the first game of the playoff era, which was each of these teams' arch rivals, Ohio State versus Oregon. So there's a weird number. There's funny parallels between this year and that year, but I'm not going to get in too deep into it. The point is that for a lot of on and off the field reasons, this should be a fantastic game with a lot of stuff you're going to want to pay attention to. As for my actual pick, I don't think it's any secret that I'm an Ohio State fan, so it's going to hurt me a little bit to say this. I think it's a little bit more likely that Michigan can find a way to win this game, because I don't think there's one way where Michigan needs to win. I think there's a more narrow path to victory for Washington. And so while I kind of think if I were to set this at like percentage points, I'd say like 60%, 55 to 60% chance of Michigan winning, and like 40 to 45% chance of Washington winning. And so I'm going to say Michigan wins. They cover. Again, the line's only 5 at the moment, so I think the only thing that would surprise me is if Washington just boat races Michigan. I can see this being a close game either way, and I could also see Michigan, if they can shut Penix and company down early, it could be a long night for Washington. But Washington, I think, is still going to score points. So if I had to guess, I'd say Michigan by like a touchdown, but the combined totals gonna be, around 60 points or so. Should be a really good game, guys. I can't wait to see the game, and I'll give you guys a reaction after the game ends. And that's all I got for you today. I will be back at the end of next week with a reaction to everything we've seen, from the games to some of the other bowl games, and an off-season top 10. Anyways, that's all I have for you guys today. Thanks for watching, and enjoy the game.